Well, hello, caviar dreamers.
Hello, caviar dreamers. Ooh, the light is very bright today.
It's a great way to start the new year, though. We're out of COVID.
It is. We are out of COVID. We're feeling better. Not 100%, but better.
Yes, and guess what? Working on your mental health. Self-care, because 2021 did not start amazing.
No, it did not.
So crazy. But we have on a great guest, Dr. Sam Von Reiche.
Yes.
I think Sam Von Reiche, that's how you say the last name.
Yes,
We're going
I
to
want to
clarify.
make sure we get that right. And she wrote an incredible book called Rethink Your Shrink.
Yes, and you know I'm all about the therapy.
Yes. But you know what the thing is that Dr. Sam thinks, talk therapy and meds are not the only solution. No, I really agree with that. I like alternative therapies. I don't think you could expect a Ferrari to run well if you put Coca-Cola in the gas tank. And I think that we all eat wrong. We, are too stimulated from our phones and our computers, and we expect our mental health to have clarity and our bodies to function well. If you don't treat your body right, it's not going to work right.
You guys, this is going to be like a reset for your life.
And her personal story is so interesting to how she got to her own caviar dream. So she's the real deal. Let's get her on.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Sam. This book is amazing. I just love the title, Rethink Your Shrink. But we want to talk about how you even got here and your childhood, because it's like you said, you were stealing jewelry from your friend's house when you were 7 years old. Tell us about this.
Wow, you remember that. That's awesome. I mean, initially, I would say to begin with that my parents had a very unhappy marriage. I think they loved each other in a certain way, but they didn't know how to get along. So I and my two sisters were very much ongoingly exposed to lots of fighting. Our mother told us way too much about what was going on. We had a sister who was later diagnosed as autistic. She was moderately autistic, and so there was a lot of focus on her and her problems. My older sister had a lot of personality issues. She was very rebellious, and so here I was, kind of like the good kid in the middle of all of this chaos. My solution to how I was going to feel good was to be as perfect as possible. And I would say I succeeded in that. For the most part, I was a good-natured kid. I was good to my parents. I was the one who had friends. I was very, very good in school. And so that was, kind of where the plunging off point for me was in college, as I indicated in the introduction of my book, where, I know it sounds completely insane, but I got my first B+ that I think I had ever received at Princeton. And I started to feel suicidal. And it was in, I know that sounds completely ridiculous. But it was in a course that was pursuant to a law degree, which at that time I thought that I was going to pursue. My parents had, I came from Jewish parents.
Yes.
And I had two options. I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer. So when I got that B+ in that course, I started to think, oh my God, maybe I'm not going to be good in this. And also it was my freshman year. And, everybody at Princeton was the best. And so I had taken so much stock in being the best. I worked very hard, but, I was very smart. And so much of my self-esteem was invested in that. And here I clearly was not the best. I mean, I was going to school with people who are complete geniuses, people who didn't have to work a fraction of the time that I had to work in order to do well. And my objective at Princeton was not only to do well and to be like, oh, wow, this is so great, I got in, but to be the best, right? The cream of the crop. And so, so that made that, that was the first time that freshman year after Princeton that I really started to feel like, I don't think I can do this anymore. I'd be better off not being alive. I can't handle this. And that was the first time that my parents, had the thought to send me to therapy. Meanwhile, I had also experienced, I would say, years of depression and anxiety in high school, and had an episode for that maybe lasted a few years of PTSD after pretty severe bullying for being Jewish at the age of like 10 years old. So, but at that time, like that wouldn't be the first move that a parent would make, like, oh, this kid needs therapy. They protected me. They pulled me out of the school. I was homeschooled for the rest of the year. They put me in a Jewish school where I did very, very well. And that ended up being part of my journey, because that was my first exposure to God, to Jewish tradition, to spirituality, and that really, later became some of the foundation of my spirituality, which became such an incredibly, I would say spirituality is the most important thing in my life, and has been for decades. I came from an atheist family, which was very common among Jewish people, having gone through, we lost lots of people in the Holocaust and all of that. So, the solution of a lot of American Jews was just to assimilate. There was no God, because obviously how could God let something like that happen? So I had no exposure to that whatsoever. No one ever used the word God, never. And so here I was plopped.
Didn't grow up going to temple.
Nothing, zero. So, they felt, as I think a lot of assimilated Jews do, still do, they felt very proud of being Jewish, and they were very intellectual, very highly cultured people, both my parents, wonderful people, even though they fought like cats and dogs. But no mention of God. And so the fact that by default I ended up being plopped into this Jewish school really gave me exposure to spirituality that was completely alien to me. And as I said, formed the basis of really what I think is the most important thing in my life now, which is interesting, because psychologists generally don't, just like a lot of other things in the book, psychologists do not talk about spirituality and how people's spiritual lives in psychotherapy. It is very unusual, and that is based on the fact that psychology has a background in science. It was struggling so hard to be a science that it didn't want to seem like an art for a very long time. Part of the Freudian tradition, psychologists are trained specifically not to talk about themselves ever. And so, my writing that book is also breaking with that tradition of, and I'm a very real person, and certainly my clients, do know some things about me here and there, but it was really about breaking that tradition of psychologists specifically, not therapists so much, but psychologists being totally neutral, like not having, I was instructed, don't keep a picture in your office that could identify anybody in your life, like that extreme. So later on, of course, having had much therapy like that, and recognizing that I didn't think that healed people, because it didn't heal me, that I saw myself more in this book, certainly, and also in therapy to some extent, as a role model, that if people don't know I've gone through stuff, then how are they supposed to feel inspired by me if I just seem like this perfect person that doesn't have any issues? And so the book was really, wow, that's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, but I
that
think
was so relatable.
But yes, it's so
interesting.
and I just absolutely love it. So what made you like, you started doing all these alternative therapies, which I find so enlightening and interesting, with the vitamin D and the fish oil, and there's so many helpful things. So tell me, how did you, because listen, I've been in therapy for years, talk therapy, I'm not on medication. But what made you go through all of these different things and made you learn about it? Like the ADHD that you diagnosed with?
Sure. So that part of my journey, I think, started, I'm somebody who very much believes that everything happens for a reason. And then that became very much foundational to my kind of my spirituality, that, from the time I was in high school, I had a lot of physical problems. I had a lot of mental problems. A lot of mental problems, but I also had a lot of physical issues, and the physical things got a lot more attention because my that was the time that, again, parents weren't like carting their kids off to therapy left and right. But I had chronic pain already by the time I was in high school, and that progressed during my 20s. I developed TMJ. I developed severe migraines that used to be like excruciating, unremitting for days on end. And I not only was that never diagnosed, and I think neurology these days is a lot more hip about migraines, but at that time it was never diagnosed, and I get debilitating, and I was already working as a psychologist. They would last for 3 or 4 days.
I have that. I'm on Topamine.
I mean, crying, trying everything. So one of the things that a friend I had at the time had said, listen, I've had migraines. Have you ever tried acupuncture? And that is the reason acupuncture is the first chapter of the book, because that was really the beginning of my holistic, alternative, out of the box journey. Is discovering that that I had the headaches for years, and the very first experience of relief that I had was something out of National Geographic. Like literally, I was in day 3 of a migraine. My friend drove me to this acupuncturist. I forget how the hell we got her name. And this woman barely spoke English, and she stuck needles all over my head, and she lit the ones on the top of my head like incense.
Aye.
And I was scared, but I was desperate. And desperation, I think, desperation is like a really good recipe to be open to something new. I came from a very conservative family medically. I mean, they were the kind of family that said like, oh, chiropractors are witch doctors, like other than an MD. And so this woman lit the top of my head. I had needles all over me. And, within 45 minutes, the headache had subsided and was down to maybe like a 4 or 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. And I thought, holy crap, this is I had no way of explaining this. Yeah. And that was the first experience I had that opened my eyes to the fact that there were a million different solutions, most of which I had never heard of. I had not been educated about. I never heard of this. And that was just for the migraines. But becoming a fan of acupuncture and recognizing, and then, I became familiar with the research. The research was that people on the 3rd session of acupuncture were responding with even severe depression, as opposed to antidepressants that were, that were taking months with only a 40% response rate, a positive response rate at best. So I began cautiously to, having gone from that experience with migraines, then it became acupuncture as my primary medicine, I would say, for all the different physical issues that I had. And then I began to recommend it to my clients for anxiety and depression. And the results of that were like mind-blowing. They were mind-blowing. So I thought, why has no one ever told me about this? Why have I never heard of this? Why did I never hear about this in my doctoral training or thereafter? And I began to refer, I would say, at this point, probably 30% of the clients that I work with are also involved in acupuncture. What I found was that I'd refer somebody after the 2nd or 3rd visit. They would feel so much better, and then I could take all the credit. No, I'm just
yeah, but that's so good.
I mean, amazing. And I
love acupuncture. I have to go more often.
I went as far as recruiting an acupuncturist to my own office, who I had for many years, And I just having moved to a much larger space now in Ridgewood, we are going to be.
Oh, you're in New Jersey?
Yes.
Why did I think?
Yeah, well, that's how. I mean, Marty lives 15 minutes away from me.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm so coming there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Why did I think you were in the city?
I don't know.
So the new building is right on 17 in Ridgewood, and we have space now actually to have an acupuncture room. So this is the point that I was making. Whereas, my previous office and premise didn't have space. But I refer, like unbelievable number of clients to. I have my guy that I adore. And he's in Ridgewood, and he's wonderful, Marcus Rosario. And and I recruited him. I found him in a practice he was working, and I thought, this guy is gifted. And I never looked back. I mean, that was really the beginning, going back to your question about, it opened my mind in a way that it could never slam shut again. Like, I was off to the races. Then it was like, I had all these other issues that I figured out over time. Like, another big one was that I developed a thyroid issue, which I had probably had from the time, honestly, that I was a child.
Yeah.
I had trouble maintaining a healthy weight. I had issues with my body temperature. My dad also suffered from severe anxiety and depression, and I thought he had a thyroid issue. And again, I started the traditional route. I begged my colleagues, like, there's something wrong with me. I'm exhausted all the time. My hair was falling out. I gained 25 pounds. And nobody would, they were like, oh, you seem really stressed out.
Yeah.
Maybe you should relax, which is like the famous answer to the things we don't understand, especially in a 40-year-old woman. So I had to go on a search, and in the end, I discovered, all these, or actually it wasn't all these, because it was a few holistically oriented physicians talking about subclinical hypothyroidism, and how that led, mostly women, to have all of these symptoms, wander from doctor to doctor and not get a solution. So I went as far as going to the Atkins Clinic in New York City. I'm sure you guys remember. Yes. Dr. Atkins, who has since passed away many years ago. Wow, what a character. But I went there, and, he substantiated a diagnosis that nobody had been willing to give me, because he was actually a very out of the box, very holistic doctor. From that point to feeling better, like, I'm going to say that within 2 weeks of being on the right medication, symptoms that I had now for maybe like 18 months, including like the extra weight, the depression, the exhaustion, they began to subside. And that was another thing. Through my own experience, I became extremely attuned to the role of hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism to some extent in anxiety disorders, panic disorder, depression, the inaccuracy of hormone testing in general. And from that point, over a few years, I developed an entire group of holistic physicians and practitioners that I refer. I would say, I do a standard thyroid evaluation for just about every patient who comes to me for depression and anxiety. And I think that therapists, I've honestly never met a therapist who is not miserably ignorant about the role of hormones in mental health. So that was another thing for me that, later on, of course, learning different things about hypothyroidism, that there are different kinds, and what Hashimoto's is, and that's in my thyroid chapter as well, that's really an inflammatory condition. And that led me to really look.
I just was recently diagnosed with Hashimoto's.
So, so things like diet and reduction of your toxic load being extremely important to reducing thyroid antibodies, which are at the heart of Hashimoto's. No one ever told me that. What I was told is that there was nothing I could do to reduce my thyroid antibodies that I should just take medication. However, my thyroid antibodies were literally some of the highest numbers that the doctors that I had ever seen. They were 2,000, 3,000. Like, I mean, I really should have been, many times, I think, in my life, I should have been on disability. Like, I should not have been functioning. And so, you know, so while it is not perfect, what the single most important thing that I did, as far as in addition to medication, which I'd done many years before, was I changed my diet and drastically. I went on an anti-inflammatory food plan that not only cured whatever residual eating body image issues I had going back to high school, actually more like middle school, because my weight at that point my weight and my diet remained extremely stable without trying. But also my antibody numbers from my Hashimoto's went from the thousands down to a couple of hundreds. It was crazy. I mean, it was actually insane. So, you know, I am my own best or worst guinea pig, I guess, is my answer. And every answer that I discovered for myself, I was so excited about, you know, integrating that somehow into what I was doing with my clients. And I have to say, I feel as though I have helped many more hundreds of people, at very least, by virtue of the things I suffered from myself.
Well, I think there's so much good information in this book. Do you work with other doctors and psychologists, like groups, to like teach them or have discussion about it?
So, you know, so certainly I do my best to educate the physicians, my own team, certainly, which is very familiar with and representative of my kind of holistic brand. You would be surprised outside of the holistic community, however, how defensive and I don't want to say narrow-minded, but I would say to some extent narrow-minded, what they call allopathic physicians can be. Like the idea that it's like, well, there's not enough data. Whereas in fact, there is quite a bit of data. And there's this sense that they don't want to be kind of like toppled over by these holistic concepts and treatments. And so in my own community, it's like we speak that language. Outside of that community, it's it's challenging. I mean, I do my best to be an influencer, and I do believe I have, but there's a sharp dividing line between what they call allopathic medicine, Western medicine, and integrative medicine.
I know, which is tough, because I think it's a good, you have to have a combination, but I definitely think the holistic approach, I mean, it just helps so much, and it's helped you so much. And I just feel like when I do things also.
Yeah. My husband is bipolar. So, and through the course of our marriage, he has seen every, doctor, from the most expensive to the most out there. And I've seen him be treated by Dr. Feelgoods, where he's been over medicated and zombie-like. His weight has been an issue. He's had a lot of issues. So I've seen this firsthand. And to me, I can never understand why no psychiatrist would say, hey, should we look at your diet? Like you're relying on this medication, which makes you not feel good. Now you're pumping yourself full of sugar, or you're starving yourself through the day and eating in the middle of the night and you can't sleep. Like, to me, your body as a whole, it's like you're eating, thinking, your gut health, your mind. It doesn't make sense to me that doctors don't address it as a whole. It was so refreshing to find your book.
Thank you. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And the more people become educated about holistic approaches, the less sense it makes to them that Western doctors don't even mention that psychiatrists. I recently, came into contact with somebody who, at very least, mentioned having used a couple of supplements with his patients, and I was honestly blown away. Like, wow, that's so different. So things like diet, looking at hormones, very much looking at hormones, and other types of self-care strategies for bipolar acupuncture, believe it or not, even working with a few severely psychotically bipolar patients have benefited tremendously from acupuncture, like amazing. I was honestly surprised.
Wow.
Well, I'm hoping that your husband is doing better, or has found some type of.
Right now he's doing a little better. It's very hard to diagnose a lot of things correctly and live with like a function that you have a quality of life with mental health.
It certainly is, and it's still, honestly, in my opinion, still in a rather primitive stage. I feel like psychiatry is really rudimentary. It's kind of like throwing the spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks in a lot of ways. I mean, don't get me wrong. The purpose of my book is not to communicate that some people do not benefit from meds. That's certainly not what I wanted to say. I feel like a lot of medication is unnecessary if people understood they had options, and also the amount of suffering that people have to go through to get to the right medication is not like they're using a scan. I mean, now they're finally doing genetic testing with people in the past several years to see at least which classes of drugs they're likely to respond to and which not. But even those tests had been around for many years, and most psychiatrists weren't even using them, even though they existed. So in other words, you're not going to do well with Lexapro, or, Concerta wouldn't be the drug for you. You should go with Adderall, or whatever it is. So, but, I mean, the more I grow, and, I always think like, okay, now I have a new problem. Well, I'm going to be able to help somebody. And even though I don't jump around happy that I have this new issue, like I know now, having been in practice a long time, that I will have the opportunity to help someone who is lost with the same issue that I'm figuring out a solution to.
It is so interesting. I think this is such a great way for everybody to start their year, to buy Rethink Your Shrink. And I think you have just so many hands-on, easy things for people to do to feel better. It's not like this incessant talking. It's like, get on the fish oil, light therapy. I mean, these are things that people could just do on their own, which very easily could really just help themselves.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, most of those solutions are far less expensive than therapy. I have my own light therapy lamp here, sitting right here, and it was like $35 on Amazon, and it works like a dream. Works like a dream. You just have to remember to use it. But even people who don't think they have a seasonal affective disorder, they can have a seasonal component, it's unusual for me to not see somebody improve with vitamin D or light therapy. And so, so simple. And actually, I have to say, something that the traditional medical community has come around to somewhat. When I started out, nobody was even testing for vitamin D. That was like a big thing when people started to do that. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and tell everybody where they could find you.
So my book, Rethink or Shrink: The Best Alternatives to Talk Therapy and Meds, is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble as well. And if you're interested in getting some guidance on any of these things that we've talked about today, any of the issues in the book, certainly feel free to reach out to me at drsamvonreiche.com, which is our therapy website, located in Ridgewood. I would love to get feedback from people about how they found the book, what they found most interesting. That's really a turn on for me these days. I'm really enjoying that.
Good. And do you have any social media that anybody could follow you on Instagram?
So I'm on Instagram. That's dr.samvonreiche. and also on Facebook, Dr. Sam Von Reiche. Those are my two main social media channels. There are a bunch of videos on YouTube under the same name.
Thank you so much. This was so informative and so helpful for everybody to take care of themselves.
Now, everyone's anxiety is through the roof. These techniques are so easy to just adapt into your daily life.
Yeah, COVID is a whole, but I certainly think this is a very timely book for COVID. You know, I certainly think self-improvement is one thing that we do have control over in the safety of our own homes. And, you know, I certainly, you know, utilized a good portion of the shutdown to not only be working remotely, but also to be finishing the book that we're talking about today. So, you know, I felt like you take a difficult, right? I mean, take lemons and make lemonade. And so I feel like it was kind of like this book is my COVID baby.
Good.
Thank you both for being so lovely. It was so
nice meeting you. And we're gonna come see you in person.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye. She was great.
She was great. And I'm telling you, people rely heavily on medication.
I know Western medicine.
And I think that it's not about not using medication. It's about the combination of a whole life approach.
Listen, I'm all about acupuncture. You cannot be afraid of needles. You gotta go.
Shit scared of needles.
Joe and I love a good acupuncture. You feel like $1 million after.
I'm so afraid of
being
like a little hedgehog. You look like a little hedgehog.
I used to take my son when he was little.
Oy, I'm so afraid of
acupuncture. And it helped him. I used to take him for acupuncture as a little boy.
Used to go.
It's great. Acupuncture is great. I love the idea of light therapy. I'm going to order a light right now on Amazon.
I think we should. Yeah, definitely. And I'm a big believer in supplements. You know, we put our stepdaughter, instead of on an ADHD medication, we put her on a natural supplement that was recommended by actually another progressive psychiatrist, L-tyrosine, which is good for cognitive function. And it was amazing. The letters about her disrupting the Zoom and turning on her volume and having her dolls sing to the class were all gone overnight.
Well, that's so good.
It was impressive.
So but I'm going to take their vitamin D, take their zinc, fish oil, read this book, Rethink Your Strength by Dr. Sam Von Reiche.
Yeah, everyone has to get this book. It's a great, great book.
Yeah, easy read, and you're going to find it super interesting, and you're going to feel better.
And also, don't beat yourselves up if you feel anxious, depressed.
Yes,
we have a million reasons to be anxious and depressed. We have a pandemic.
Yes.
We have political unrest, civil unrest. We have, you know, businesses
people aren't working,
closing.
Things are just crazy. So don't beat yourself up.
Yeah, if you didn't feel a little out of sorts right now, that would be strange. That would probably need medication.
I absolutely agree.
So take good care of yourselves, everyone.
Yes, Caviar Dreamers, we need you healthy.
We do. And you can find us at Caviar Dreams, Tuna Fish Budget on YouTube and Instagram. Anyway, you listen to your podcasts, new episodes every Wednesday with The Real Margaret Josephs and The Life of Mrs. B.
That's right. See you guys next week.
Keep dreaming.
Keep dreaming, Caviar Dreamers.